Have you ever created a process model as a business analyst that was like messy all over the place? Nobody understood it? Well, I have. And so today I'm going to share with you 5 tips that I keep in mind whenever I'm going to embark on creating process models as a business analyst on projects that I'm working on. And hopefully these will be useful to you to bear in mind as you're also doing the same thing, but they will enable you to start creating process models like a pro. As business analysts, creating process models is literally what we do. I mean, okay, process models, process maps, flow charts, whatever else they call it. I mean, whatever you call it, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? And the tips I'm going to share with you today are effectively the things that I bear in mind when I'm creating I just call it a process map. That's what I call it. For me, when I think about what it is, it's effectively visually illustrating and representing the tasks and the action taken by either a person or a system to accomplish a specific goal or objective. I mean, that sounds like I just read it from a textbook. I literally just made that up. I know. But listen, that's when I think about a process map, is that visual representation of what's happening and what's going on. And then obviously you then tag as is for current processes, things that are happening right now, and then to be for things that are going to be happening when the new design or the new solution is in place. But that either way, these 5 tips work whether you're doing as is or to be. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Welcome, I'm Tanner Jacobs from Inside Business Analysis. This is a place to be where we speak about all things business analysis or working in tech and helping you to advance and grow your career. If this sounds like your kind of place, then, subscribe to the YouTube channel or subscribe to our email list so we can reach out to you directly on your email inbox. Right, let's get into it. Okay, so the first tip for me is to plan before you model. See, I remember when I started, I would literally run straight into creating the flow charts, the models. I'll be like, okay, what do you do? And then what do you do after that? Then what do you do after that? And I'm trying to put that in the boxes and put the labels on there and effectively trying to create the model in real time. And that will literally be the very first thing I did. But over the years, I realized actually that there was so many problems with that approach, right? First and foremost, sometimes you create a model that wasn't the thing that I was actually trying to do. Other times I'd create the model, but then, I'd have problems down the line and having to resolve them and restart again from scratch. And so these 5 things that I include in my kind of process model plan hopefully will help you as well. So the first thing I would say is in your plan, right? The first thing you need to think about is, what is the process that I'm looking into? Or what are the processes, if there's more than one, that you're looking into? And you want to specifically name this so that you're very clear on the actual process itself. So it might be process a refund, it might be submit a claim, it might be create an account. Whatever the case is, all of these things have specific names on them so that you know exactly, okay, this is the process that I'm looking into, and make a list of all of them, right? Each one of them, right? I'm going to look into this and I'm going to look into that, I'm going to look into that. And some processes, some people might say, well, you're looking into payments or you're looking into accounts. And it's like, well, that's too broad. Let's really be specific. What exactly am I going to be looking at here, so that we're very clear and we're both on the same page about what needs to be analyzed. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say that you need to kind of include in your plan is to then understand who is involved in this processes. Effectively, who should I be speaking to from end to end? Who's involved in this thing? And this is something that you will get from your subject matter expert. You have discussions with them to say, okay, this is the process I need to put together. Who's involved in creating this process and making this process come to life? And this particular thing is actually really important, because I remember there was a time I was speaking to a stakeholder and, we're really getting into it. I'm like, yeah, this is great. Like, I'm having all the information that I need. They're really breaking it down for me. I'm really understanding everything. And then I get to this part of the process. I'm like, okay, so what happens next? And then they say, oh, then I just hand it over to so-and-so. And then they do something about it. And then eventually comes back to our team after they've done something with it. And it's like, oh my goodness, nobody told me about so-and-so. Like, who is this so-and-so? Where did they come from, right? So like, for me, that's why it's important to be like, okay, who is involved, so that I'm not going to be wasting people's time here. I can actually have, for example, if there's 3 of them, I can invite all 3 of them to the conversation. We can have a combined joint workshop between the 4 of us, myself included, and effectively understand, right, what do you do, then what do you do, and then what do you do, and then kind of put the process together that way around. So who is involved is super key. The third thing that you want to then include in your plan is to understand what is the objective of the process, or what's the end goal that you're aiming to do. So by completing these series of tasks and steps in this process, what is it that you're trying to like accomplish? And this is obviously, this can be linked to the name, the first thing that we mentioned, right? What's the process? So you might be create an account, and you kind of say, okay, the objective is for a new customer to have an active account created for them, and they can log in, etc. Right? That might be the objective of that process. But it's really key to understand that, because then that gives you your endpoint. That gives you that, okay, this is the end. This is where the process, where we're mapping it. This is where we finish it, at least in the beginning. I'm going to share with you another thing a little bit later on. But that's the third reason why I like to know what's the objective of this particular process. And sometimes it is in the name, but sometimes it isn't. So it's a good thing to ask. The fourth thing I'd ask as well is, what are the business rules that I should be aware of that may kind of impact or dance around this process that I'm going to be mapping? And again, this is still part of planning. The reason why it's important to know this question, and I will admit it's a hard one. You know, it's not going to be the case every time, but I ask this question sometimes to my subject matter experts, etc., because it really helps with me doing a little bit of research. So I don't go into the room completely blank, right? I'm like, okay, I don't know what you do, but I do know about this kind of code of conduct that you follow, or this rules that you kind of abide by. I've read into them. I know what they mean, so that when they refer to them in the process, I'm able to make the link and say, oh yeah, right, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Whereas if I don't have that knowledge, and they're telling me the process, and then they turn around and say, yeah, as part of us doing this, we also have to like make sure that this particular rule is followed. And I'm like, oh, what is that rule? Okay, where does that live? And I'm now asking them questions around business rules around the process. Like I said, this is one of the ones where it's like, okay, you could skip this. To be fair, it depends. It depends on the process. It depends on the project. It depends on the place you're working in. But when I was working in financial services, obviously compliance is a big thing, right, in financial services. And so you want to just have an understanding of these things, so that when you are discussing the process, you're not like, okay, can you please explain the rule, because you have an understanding of that. And the fifth thing to include in your plan, this is again before you model, is what is the objective of this activity? And this is for your notes, really, as opposed to kind of asking other stakeholders. So you want to really ask this question from the perspective of the project. What is it that why am I looking into this process, right? So for instance, you might say, well, I'm looking into this process because we are looking to reduce manual tasks and automate as much as possible. Or another objective might be that we are looking to understand how long it takes to complete this whole process end to end. What's the time cost to the business? Or it might simply be that you're looking to understand how will the new system interact and work with the current processes, right? The project might say, we're not looking to change the business process. We're simply just changing where they do the process. So right now, maybe they do it on local spreadsheets, but through this project, we're going to give them a tool or a software that they can start to implement this process into. And yes, if we need to change the order of the tasks and flows, that's fine. But at the end of the day, the main objective is to implement a new solution in line with current business processes, not change the process. So you can see how the objective then influences the way that you would map the process, the kinds of questions you'd be asking, the kinds of things you'd be looking to kind of delve into when you're having this discussion. So that's number one, plan before you model. That was a heavy one, but the next ones should be fairly straightforward, because at this point, this is where the fun begins, right? Now you've planned, you got your plan in place, you got your idea what you're going to do. The second tip I would say you should do is to be very clear on the trigger or the event, as it's called in UML, I believe, and BPMN, to be fair. But anyway, this is effectively, what is it that kicks this process off? What is it that starts this thing, right? And according to kind of the Business Analysis book, which is the 4th edition by BCS, there is a chapter on all of this, and it defines this in three. It says there's 3 types of things that can trigger a process. The first thing is an internal event. So this could be like, for instance, it's a manager submits a form for a staff leaver, or it might be that a team member basically raises an IT request, right? So that's an internal trigger. An external trigger is effectively similar. It's basically the same thing, but it's just that it's done by an external party, so a customer, or an end user, or a supplier, or a vendor. Like they make a purchase, they make a claim, or whatever, right? They trigger the process. That's what the process won't kick off until they raise a request, for example. So that's the difference between internal and external, just kind of where the source is. And then the final one is time based. And so this is effectively like, for example, at the end of the month, or once a quarter, or at midnight on a Friday night, or whatever, right? There's so many different kind of timestamps, but it's effectively at either going to be, the process will either be triggered by an internal event from the business, an external event from somebody outside of the business, or a time-based trigger based on a specific point in time. Now, this is key to know because, again, I used to miss this. Like, I would literally kind of, like, I'll be so focused on creating the model and get so excited. And I'm thinking back to my early days as a BA, to be fair. But I would put, like, the initial node, that beginning node, the start node, and I'd never really label it. I kind of put, yeah, the process starts here, draw an arrow, put the first box in, and then just kind of put something like, I don't know, like process refund, for example. And then it's like, okay, but when you look at that, it's like, but what triggers, what is it that causes the person to do the thing, right? So the very first question that you should ask on this meeting now, the stakeholder meeting you're having, is not what do you do, but is what is it that kicks off this whole process? The question, what do you do, will open up a can of worms, which I'm going to talk about later on. But the first question should be, what is it that triggers this process? And then now give you the starting point. So that's the second tip that I go by. The third tip for me in this conversation is to understand the happy path, or the path that it should be, right? Assuming that everything is working as it should and you have everything that you need to complete this process from end to end and achieve the objective that you want to achieve, how would this look like? What does this work like, right? And at this point, I'm saying to the stakeholders that just tell me what the way should be, what should happen from start to finish, from this trigger that you've told me to the very end of the process, which the objective we already know, right? From number one, we've planned it, right? From the start to the end, what's the happy path? What is it that should happen? This is actually really key as well, because it's a good starting point, I think, because in the real world, there's always going to be alternative flows. There's always going to be a million ways that something could go wrong, or there's always going to be a million ways to do something, right? And 9 times out of 10, when you're speaking to stakeholders, they don't think in logical steps of process like you're doing as a business analyst, right? You're trying to kind of logically map the process, but the people who are doing the process, they just think of it as, well, I do this and then I do this and then sometimes I do that, and sometimes it's hard for them to, they're trying to explain everything, to be fair. So, and that's a good thing, right? You want people like that, but then you want to almost guide them and say, give me the happy path first. Otherwise, what you might get is something like, well, okay, we do A and then we do B and then we jump to E and then we go to F, but actually, depending on what happens in F, we may have to go back to C. But then if we go back to C and then the customer does this, or they don't have that, then we might be jumping back to D. And then actually at that point, we might just go back to A and then start all over again. It's like, whoa, okay. I'm sure you were able to follow that mentally because I'm using alphabets, but imagine if the customer is literally talking about what they do in that instance. Like, okay, like tell me how you make a cup of tea. Well, first of all, I get the cup from the cupboard. I put the water in the kettle. I boil the water. And sometimes I feel like having milk. Sometimes I don't. I don't know. Whatever. I put the milk in. I put the water in. Oh yeah, I get the tea bag. And it's like, oh, so you put the milk first and then you put the water in, then you get the tea bag, you put the tea bag in. It's like, no, of course not. Who does that? Like, I put the tea bag in first, right? That's literally mentally how it all sounds. So that's why for me, I'm like, okay, just tell me the step-by-step logic of the way it should work initially, how you do things, and then we can get to all of these alternative, maybe I do this or maybe this happens, or if then, etc. So that's the third tip. The fourth tip I want to share with you guys is it's a bit of an interesting one, and listen, you might think differently than me, that's fine, but for me, I would say notation matters, but only when it matters. Okay, so notation matters only when it matters, and by that I mean, okay, so we have UML and BPMN, right? Those are the two standard kind of business process notation or languages that we have as business analysts, and there may be other ones. If there are, let me know, because these are the only two that I've come across and that I personally know of. UML, Unified Modeling Language, and then BPMN, Business Process Modeling Notation. Both of them have, I guess, standards. So there's kind of ways that you build these models, and effectively with these, there's specific ways that you can like build a model, and specific ways that you can model a for example, a system task or a human task, or the specific ways that you'd model the time. I mentioned earlier on about a time trigger. You can also have kind of in the middle of two tasks, they'll be split by time. So you might do this task and then you wait until the end of the day to do the other task. And then the way you model that time gap is different for both of them. And Like I'm super geeky about these things. Like I'm telling you guys, like when I'm doing a process model, I'm gonna get it right. I'm gonna do the notation to the T, to the letter, to the point, almost as if I'm about to be graded on an exam. Until you realize, and I realize this the hard way, that customers, or at least the customer of the process, and I'll come back to that in a second, doesn't really care about the notation as much. Unless if you're sitting an exam, maybe they do. But in the business world, what they probably really care about is just that they can look at it, your model that you've built, and they can understand, right? They can look at it and they can say, yeah, I get what this is trying to portray. Because remember, in the beginning, I said this is all about illustrating the tasks taken to complete a certain objective. And if people can look at that and are able to understand, right, this is what happens to complete this objective, I get it now. And this is who is involved. You know, the concept of swim lanes comes in play and the actors involved and all the rest of it. If they can look at it and understand it, I'm telling you, that is your gold mine. That is literally what you're aiming to do. This nicely leads us to the final tip, the fifth tip. And for me, it's linked to what I previously said, but it's a wider thing. And that is that done is better than perfect. It's better to get it done, right? It's better to complete the process model. I know you want to get it perfect. You want to like literally make every line match up. You want to make sure that if you're like me, you're really into it. Like you're literally making sure, for example, you're trying out different colors maybe, or you're trying out different like line sizes. You're gonna be like, okay, which line size makes sense? Should I put size 2 or size 4? And then you're trying to be like, does it make sense that the swim lanes gaps, the gap between each task, is it uniform? Like I'm really into the, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm really like, this is exactly how I work. I'm super detailed and super wanting to make sure that I deliver something that I'm proud of. And because of that, I spend a lot of time just kind of making it look good, making it look nice, making everything like look perfectly synchronized and in order as if AI put it together. But actually, I've learned that done is just better. Like, it's better to just get it done. Get the thing done, right? If the stakeholders come back and make comments, yeah, you can amend it, you can change it. But what's more important is actually just getting things done. Like, as a business analyst, I've come to really appreciate that there is power in getting things done, week by week, being able to turn up to, your meetings and kind of saying, yep, this is what I've done, this is what I've accomplished, this is what we've delivered, or I've sent this to the stakeholder for review, I've sent this over to the team and they're happy with it, they signed it off, or whatever. Like, just getting things done is so powerful. And don't be held back by, like me, the kind of this need to be perfect, or this need to do things super duper perfectly, that it's not going to get done in time. And the way I kind of know when to stop for me is two things. Number one, when I look at a process model and I ask the question of, does it make sense? And does it clearly articulate the objective of the process? Then if it does, then yeah, I've done my job. Like, I've done the thing I need to do. If it's not pretty, it's not pretty. That's a whole different matter. But is the thing clear? Is it clear? Is it straightforward language? Can people look at it and understand? If the answer is yes, then I'm done, right? Or the second thing is, have I been spending too long? Like, I've been spending the last 3 days just making it pretty. I finished it on Monday, but it's Wednesday and I'm still like moving things about. Like, what's going on? At this point, like, I'm not adding anything new to this process or taking anything away. I'm simply just rearranging things or trying different colors, different fonts and all the rest of it. Or I'm trying to move the swim lane one way and make sure that the task, I'm like, okay, at that point it's like, okay, now you're done. Okay, just get it done and move on. So those are my 5 tips, like, of me when I'm putting together a process model, the things I kind of bear in mind and think about when I'm doing this. Process modeling is super fun. I really enjoy it. It's a core skill of business analysis, and I would definitely encourage you to dive into it. If you've really enjoyed kind of today's discussion and today's topic of kind of how my thought processes and process models, definitely let me know. I'd love to hear from you. If you're watching this on YouTube, comment below and let me know what you think. Apart from that, guys, it's been a pleasurable discussion, and I'll see you on the next one.